In my quest to scratch the ever-present Fire Emblem itch, I stumbled upon a game called Those Who Rule. I can give you the official description about this game, but really all you need to know is that it's a Tellius-era Fire Emblem game on a hex grid, and it's really bloody good one at that. This game is a labor of love passion project by a self-published solo developer, and it shows in both good and bad ways. The game does feel like it is missing a good chunk of quality of life features you'd expect from a modern SRPG, and there are parts where it's unpolished or clunky. However, the dev Eldin has been nothing but professional, receptive to feedback, and transparent about upcoming changes. They're also extremely available and helpful to players with issues, to the point they'll ask them to send in their save files just to fix and edit certain things and then send them back. The game is $20, and I understand people who may have concerns about paying $20 for a game that seems a little unpolished, but for me it was a $20 very well spent. Okay, on to the actual game now. I'll start by saying it wears its Fire Emblem influence on its sleeves. It's basically a Tellius Fire Emblem game on a hex grid, so I'll frame the gameplay around comparing it to Fire Emblem. So right off the bat, melee weapons available to you will be very familiar: axes, swords, and lances. But rather than a weapon triangle rock paper scissors, each melee weapon type has a unique weapon trait that sets them apart. Swords get a stat buff based on where your character is facing, spears get vantage, and axes get a dollar store version of Luna. Each melee weapon type also has a one-hand and two-hand type. One-handed melee weapons allow you to equip a shield, and two-handed melee weapons offset the lack of shield by having another offensive trait. Broadswords and polearms lets you hit two enemies, and great axes lets you hit through shields. As I mentioned, there are different types of equipable shields, but I won't go into details. Besides, they all give you some sort of perk through a regenerating secondary health bar. Bows also exist as a ranged chip tool that can't counterattack. There's no magic in this game, but there is healing, and the game conveniently glosses over how healing actually works without magic. I'm guessing it's like a first aid kit. Another noteworthy thing to discuss is the hex grid and the unit-facing directions. Like a lot of other SRPGs, but most notably missing from Fire Emblem, where you're facing matters a lot. Mainly in this game, it affects your dodge chance and shield block when taking hits, with backstabs being completely undodgeable. I'm always in favor for orientation being relevant in SRPGs, and orientation in a hex grid is even more fun from a strategic standpoint. Sometimes I wonder why Fire Emblem doesn't experiment with this, but I think the no orientation, no elevation almost thing is probably what differentiates them from other SRPGs. Anyways, the last thing I'll mention about the character building and mechanics side of this is that everyone has a personal skill. Classes get a skill, and then on promo you get even more skills. Everyone gets 6 in total by endgame. When I first saw this, I was wondering if it was gonna turn into something like Engage or a ROM hack like Cerulean Crescent, where you do your heavy lifting in a long player phase, with every unit chaining relevant abilities. Or if it was going to be more like Awakening or Fates, where you play Eugenics Emblem to create a unit with a crazy good skill pool, sit them at a choke point, and then let the game play itself on enemy phase. But I'm happy to report that it is neither, and I felt the game struck a very good balance between skills feeling ever-present without being overbearing. They are strong and they can define a unit, but they don't break a unit. Good SRPG fundamentals are still king. So, about the maps now. They are cool, and part of the coolness comes from playing on a hex grid. The objectives are your standard SRPG set, like route, seize, arrive, survive, etc. However, the thing that makes it exciting is there are clearly defined side objectives that gives rewards at the end. This spices up the map significantly without needing to introduce gimmick-heavy map designs like in Fates or Engage. The next portion might be considered gameplay spoilers for some people. I won't be going over any story spoilers, but you've been warned. If you want to skip this part, skip forward approximately 50 seconds starting now. But then this does segue well into one of the few letdowns I have about the game's mechanics in general, and this is relevant especially at the end. A lot of mechanics just got abandoned towards the end, side objectives being one of them. Without the side objectives, the last few maps became a little bit bland because there wasn't really anything to push me to take risks. Besides the lack of side objectives, in the early game there were also potentially dangerous mechanics such as getting set on fire or being poisoned. They were threatening stuff that you had to play around, but then they vanished by mid-game. I find the enemies also do not utilize their active skills at all, so maps were trivialized mostly by sticking as one giant death ball slowly mowing down the enemies across the map. Otherwise, overall, pretty good. It definitely lost a little bit of steam at the end, in my opinion, but it hardly takes away from the rest of the game. And here are my spoiler-free thoughts about the story and the characters. It's fine. Nothing amazing, hits all the Fire Emblem beats. It's totally different from modern-era Saturday morning cartoon Fire Emblem stories. I'd say better than most Fire Emblem stories, but the bar isn't very high there.
I'm the 13th emblem. The Fire Emblem?
I enjoyed the Path of Radiance style support conversations as well, in the base, because they're always framed around what's happening, rather than a flashback or a completely unrelated side story that modern Fire Emblem or other SRPGs tend to do. Otherwise, yeah, does its job well. I get the character motivations, I get their strengths, I get their flaws, story kept me hooked throughout, no complaints there. Finally, some people will take issue to the fact that Those Who Rule lacks polish and modern SRPG quality of life, especially for a game you're paying $20 for. Personally, for me, the game gets an unconditional pass on all the clunkiness and polish issues on account that this is a solo developer labor of love passion project. And I know a lot of these things are actively being worked on as well, since Eldin has been nothing but transparent and open about anything that he's working on. The only thing I really wish it had most is also the one thing that Eldin said won't be in this title, and that's battle saves. This game is so inspired by Path of Radiance that even battle saves are excluded to recreate the experience. I get that some people feel like it takes away from the gameplay, but personally, I like to play with some sort of checkpoint or battle saving. Okay, so those were my thoughts about Those Who Rule. It's a great game, amazing $20 spent. Some people will be rightfully turned off by the unpolished, clunky nature of the game. I think that's understandable, but I was more than happy to part with that $20 to support a dev working on an amazing passion project. This was probably the most Fire Emblem SRPG I've played to date, outside of straight up Fire Emblem ROM hacks. I had a great time and I would strongly recommend this. With that said, let me go on an unhinged tangent to fire shots at the most disappointing character in my entire run. So, Elias, story-wise, is a very important character to your squad. When I look at the unit, I thought he was going to be the Jagen type, but looking at the growth rates, 50s across the board, it didn't look that bad either. I don't think the intention was for him to fall off, but he did. For class builds, I went Lancer Marshal, and it was not working. My guy just couldn't amount to anything. I was feeding him like he's a trainee, expecting him to turn a corner all of a sudden, but he just never did. In the end, I was just using him as a debuff bot, with Bleed, Stagger, and Concuss. However, he doesn't have access to the best debuff in the game, which is Death, due to his subpar stats, and most of the time he wasn't even strong enough to do enough chip damage to set up kills for someone else. Eldin said he buffed Elias once already, but he still memed to death on Discord for being garbage. I'm going to start a petition to rework Elias as a Jagen, as in higher base stats and lower growth rates, and then the tutorial associated with recruiting him would be on how to read growth rates. But maybe Elias falling off is intentionally good gameplay story integration.